The United Kingdom is on the brink of a monumental shift in its foreign policy, as Sir Keir Starmer prepares to declare official recognition of a Palestinian state. This anticipated announcement, expected on Sunday afternoon, marks a significant departure from the stance held by previous British governments, which maintained that recognizing Palestine should only come as part of a broader peace process, and when it could have the greatest positive impact. But here's where it gets controversial. This change follows the Prime Minister's warning back in July that the UK would reconsider its position in September unless Israel met specific conditions. These conditions include agreeing to a ceasefire in Gaza and committing to a durable peace agreement that supports the widely discussed two-state solution, the vision of Israel and Palestine coexisting as independent nations. Ministers now argue that the conditions for recognition have reached a critical point where inaction would be morally irresponsible. They believe that acknowledging Palestinian statehood could help sustain hope for achieving lasting peace. This belief contrasts sharply with entrenched views held by certain groups. For example, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has labeled this move as rewarding terror, reflecting the deep divide on this issue. The decision has sparked strong opposition from the Israeli government, families of hostages, and some conservative politicians. Government insiders highlight the deteriorating humanitarian crisis in Gaza, with heartbreaking images of starvation and violence that Prime Minister Starmer has described as intolerable. The recent intense ground offensive by Israeli forces in Gaza City, described by a United Nations official as cataclysmic, has displaced hundreds of thousands of residents and worsened the already dire circumstances. Earlier this week, a United Nations Commission of Inquiry accused Israel of committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, a grave charge that Israel vehemently rejects, calling the report distorted and false. The ongoing expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank, which international law considers illegal, also played a crucial role in the UK's decision to recognize Palestinian statehood. Justice Secretary David Lammy, who was Foreign Secretary when this policy shift began, pointed to the contentious E1 settlement project. Critics argue that this development could effectively dismantle the possibility of a contiguous and viable Palestinian state. Lammy remarked, "The recognition of a Palestinian state comes as a direct response to the serious expansion in the West Bank, escalating settler violence, and plans like the E1 development, which threaten the very foundation of the two-state solution." The announcement has been warmly received by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who recently met with Sir Keir Starmer. Downing Street confirmed that both leaders agreed Hamas should not have any role in future Palestinian governance. On the other hand, Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch expressed support for a two-state solution, but warned in a recent opinion piece that recognizing Palestine now, especially before the release of hostages, risks rewarding terrorism, echoing concerns shared by the United States. In fact, earlier this week, relatives of hostages taken by Hamas wrote an open letter urging Sir Keir to delay recognition until the 48 remaining hostages, about 20 of whom are believed still alive, are safely returned. They stated the move dramatically complicated efforts to bring home our loved ones, noting that Hamas has already celebrated the UK's impending recognition as a triumph and subsequently disengaged from ceasefire negotiations. Further complicating matters, former U.S. President Donald Trump, while visiting the UK recently, publicly disagreed with the UK's planned recognition. Sir Keir Starmer had set the upcoming United Nations General Assembly as a deadline for Israel to demonstrate tangible progress towards ending the crisis in Gaza, achieve a ceasefire, and recommit to a sustainable peace that revives the two-state solution. Speaking in July, he conveyed, "I've always maintained we will recognize a Palestinian state as part of a legitimate peace process. At the moment, it can have the most significant impact. With the two-state solution now under threat, this is that moment to act." This move places the UK alongside several other nations, including Portugal, France, Canada, and Australia, which have recently announced or are considering recognition of Palestinian statehood. Spain, Ireland, and Norway made similar declarations last year. Currently, around 75% of the United Nations' 193 member states recognize Palestine, though it lacks defined borders, a capital city, and an independent military, rendering such recognition largely symbolic. To clarify for those less familiar with the terminology, the two-state solution envisions the establishment of an independent Palestinian state within the West Bank and Gaza Strip, with East Jerusalem as its capital. However, since Israel maintains control over the West Bank and Gaza, the Palestinian Authority currently lacks full sovereignty over its people and land. Within the Labour Party, recognizing Palestine has been a long-standing demand, intensified by increasing pressure on Sir Keir to adopt a firmer approach regarding Israel. In fact, before his July statement, more than half of Labour MPs signed a letter urging immediate recognition of a Palestinian state. Yet, this path is not without its critics. Some question the government's decision to set conditions exclusively on Israel, without imposing similar demands on Hamas, a group designated as a terrorist organization by the UK. The chief rabbi, Sir Ephraim Mirvis, has even called for a pause, highlighting that this recognition does not depend on the Palestinian Authority being democratic or committing to peace, nor does it require the release of the 48 hostages still held captive. Although government sources insist that their demands, including the release of hostages and a ceasefire, remain unchanged, officials point out that Palestinian statehood is a fundamental right that cannot be withheld due to Hamas's actions. During a meeting with President Trump at Chequers, Sir Keir reiterated that Hamas would have no role in any future Palestinian government. The context of this decision is set against the backdrop of the ongoing Gaza conflict, triggered by an unprecedented Hamas attack on southern Israel on October 7, 2023, which killed around 1,200 individuals and resulted in 251 hostages. Since then, according to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry, at least 64,964 people have died from Israeli military operations. So here's the question for you.